Hello and welcome to Boxing Social with me, Glenn McCrory. I'm here at the Unicorn Pub in Morden in Kent with a very special guest, a friend of mine for many, many years. It's Kellie Maloney. Kellie, you go back a long time.
I know, when you was youngster, I think the first time I saw you, you was 18 or 19, training at the Thomas of Becket, and I was a young upstart wanting to be a promoter.
That's right, that was 34 years ago, and I remember I met you with Doug Bidwell, and very impressed because you were very energetic, and you were talking boxing. Everything you talked about was boxing. You knew everything boxing.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time. I mean, I used to go to school in the area, but instead of going to school, I used to go up to the gym and sit there and talk to Danny Holland, Bill Chiavelli, Doug Bidwell, all the old Jim Revy, Mark Rowe, the bantamweight, Johnny Clark, and it was great. It was just like so many of Henry Cooper was there sometimes. It was, I don't know, it was like a dream, I suppose. You just sat there and you listened to the stories. They were absolutely fantastic. The old Jim Wicks, I had the privilege of seeing him there. I watched Carlos Palomino prepare there for the night that he destroyed John H. Stracey. There was Dave Boy Green used to come up there, and it just, and there was the amateur boxers that used to go up there, and it was just, I don't know, it was boxing as I knew it. It's not like boxing today.
What brought about the fascination with boxing? You name all those names, and even now, after all those years, you still sound fascinated with the time.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was because I was young. I had lots of personal problems myself that I was going through, and I was hiding, and I was bullied being quite small in school. And my PE teacher just threw a pair of gloves at me and said, "Take up boxing." And I think I enjoyed it because it was an individual sport, and a sport where it depended on you. And everyone in there I found to be quite honest. Like whoever you spoke to, they were very blunt, and they were typical Londoners really. And I don't know, it was just like it was like a community on its own, and I felt part of that community. I mean, Danny Holland used to say to me, "Shouldn't you be at school?" And I'd go, "Yeah, but I'd rather be here." He went, "Okay, you go and buy the tea bags and I'll make some tea." And I'd sit up there and, I'd go home and say to my dad, "Oh, horrible day at school today." And he'd go, "Oh yeah." And then eventually he found out what I was doing, and he'd give me a clip around the ear. And I don't know, it just, and from there it just grew. It just sort of grew, And I started amateur boxing myself, and I had 69 fights. But I preferred the training. I loved watching the trainers, so I became a young trainer, a young amateur ABA trainer.
And what age was that?
I think I was one of the youngest. I was about 20 something about 23, 24, and I ran a couple of clubs. I became the matchmaker for a club called Trinity from the Elephant and Castle. And I was the only matchmaker to get Frank Bruno beat as an amateur. I got him beat by Joe Crystal, Mel Crystal's brother.
Right.
And it cost me £100 in airplane flights and all the Guinness he could drink. And he did drink a lot of Guinness that night.
So it was obviously quite a rise through the ranks from young boxer, young trainer. Where did it go to then?
A couple of boys I was training wanted to go pro, and they were going to sign with Frank Warren, who was the new promoter on the block. And Frank came after me and said, "Will I come across and train them?" So I did, and it just grew from there. I fell out with Frank over a couple of issues, mainly to do with my brother, because my brother went pro, and he wanted my brother to fight Keith Wallace, and I was really against that because I was training both fighters. And my brother was never in the league. Keith Wallace was in, and I was quite protective of my brother. And we fell out. And then I decided to start on my own. And I had a pub in East London called the Castle, which was right on the corner of Aldgate and Ailey Street. And I put a gym in there, and it just grew. I took a couple of young fighters, and I started working for Mickey Duff and Mike Barrett. And I always had in my mind that I didn't want to be a journey manager like some of the guys I've met down the Thomas of Becket. They were happy just to put fighters in to see them, and if the fights got beat, they didn't care. But I didn't want to be that sort of fight person. I wanted to be successful. And, you know, I just grew and grew, and my stable got big. I never had no great fighters at that time. I had really good, honest fight. And I told them, if we work hard, we will achieve something. And I remember getting my first Southern Area champion, and it was like winning a world title at that time for me. And then John Stracey came on board and worked with me for a little bit. And I worked with another young South Londoner called Vince Heckman, who I'm still great friends with today. And it just grew. Then I met Ambrose Mendy, who was a real character. And he had Nigel Benn, but he didn't have a promoter's license. So I started working as a promoter. And then Terry Marsh joined us, and it was Marsh and Maloney Promotions. Terry drifted off in the end, and I continued. And eventually, Lennox Lewis walked into my life, and everything changed from there.
I was going to say, you mentioned big names all the way up. You were involved in big names, and then quite a meteoric rise, and then all of a sudden Lennox Lewis. Tell me about how you got Lennox Lewis.
I had a couple of young heavyweights previously, because I knew that if you wanted to be a good promoter, you had to have a heavyweight, because I saw what Terry Lawless, Duff and Barrett was doing as I worked with them, with Bruno, Gary Mason, Horace Notice. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to find myself a heavyweight. So I signed a young heavyweight called Danny Mole, who actually beat Gary Mason in the Southwest Divs. And Danny was a white kid from Billericay, but he had a great job in the city. And he was also a semi-pro footballer. But he was so big, I thought, I've got the golden goose here. Anyway, he'd never won his first 4 fights he got beaten, and I was determined to make sure that he won a fight, so I trained him for a fight, and I said, I'm working your corner, and he came back, and he was like a gentle giant, and he came back after round 3, and he went, I don't think I can do this, I'm going to lose this fight. And I went, do you know what, you're going to lose this fight over my dead body. And he looked and said, what do you mean? I said, you're going to get out there and you're going to win this fight. He said, I can't do it, Frank. And I had a hat pin, which I'd learnt from an old American coach, in my jacket. So I pulled that hat pin and I went to him, when the bell goes, you're going to jump off and fly out there. He went, I'm not. And the bell went, so I took the hat pin, I just stuck it right up his backside. He jumped off that stool, ran out, and he stopped the kid in that round. And it was the only win he had in his career, and he packed up after that.
He'll have been scared to come back to the corner.
And then I had another heavyweight called Leroy Frankham, who was related to Johnny Frankham, and again, big travelling boy, and I really thought he could fight like the Frankham family, because they were, and he trained, but he actually got caught cat burgling, he got stuck in a window, he was so big, and that was the end of his career. So I was just determined to find a heavyweight, and then I got this phone call from a really good old, who became a great friend of mine, and I know who you know, Ken Gorman, the journalist from the Star, and who unfortunately has now passed away, and Lawrence Lustig, and they said, you know, you want to be big in boxing, you've got to sign the heavyweight who can win the world title, and it's even greater if he's British. And I went, do you know, what are you two drinking? Because there is no British heavyweight that can win the world title. There's Frank Bruno, and he's lost to Witherspoon, and he's lost to Tyson. They went, there is one. They said he's Lennox Lewis. He won the gold medal at the Olympic Games. I went, he's a Canadian. They went, he was actually born in England. Check it out. He's got a brother called Dennis. So I made some inquiries, and it actually turns out that Dennis knew my brother Eugene. And from then, I pursued Lennox Lewis, and I kept pursuing him until he eventually returned one of my calls, and he agreed to come over to London. But originally, he only agreed to come to London to see his brother, and he insisted that he flew first class, and his attorney came with him, John Hornerworth, and they stayed 5 days in a 5-star hotel, and I had no money, but I had a pub, and my pub was about £100,000 in debt through my boxing expertise, and the bank were going to withdraw and close me down. So I signed for an American Express card, and I put everything on the American Express card, and it was up to about £20,000, and I met John Hollins, the ex-football manager, and he was working for a company called the Levitt Group, who were trying to break into the sporting world, and they contacted me and said, we'd like to have a boxing division, would you be interested? And I said, definitely. So I told them about Lennox Lewis, so they introduced me to Roger Levitt, and Levitt said to me, if you sign Lennox Lewis, I will pay your debts, I will wipe all your debts out. And so I did pursue it, and touch wood, eventually after about 5 or 6 weeks of pursuing Lennox Lewis, he agreed to sign, and that was in April 1989. We signed at the Chigwell Brewery in London, and from then it was just all up. It was all going upwards, and my life totally changed.
We could talk about Lennox and different fights and different experiences for a week, couldn't we? But what was the best highs?
You were the hardest to negotiate with. When we made you and Lennox Lewis for the Commonwealth title, I think I offered you 70,000. I know for a fact because I had it wrote down, and you actually agreed to it. And I left the room, and I came back, and for how you got it? You got the fee up by quite a bit more with a certain person called Roger Levitt.
I got it up, and you know why? The only time in my life I've ever bargained and argued for a fight was because I had an £80,000 tax bill, and that was what the fight was for. The fight was to do that, so I couldn't accept any less than what it was. I know. But Roger Levitt offered me more.
I couldn't believe it. You know, Levitt done that all the time. We had agreed deals, and he would pay more money on top of the deals. But
it should be more like him.
Yeah, but we found out why, because it wasn't his money, was it? It was everyone else's money that he was spending, and he got, as we know, he got done for fraud. And I thought I was going to lose Lennox Lewis, but thankfully I managed to keep everyone together and get everything sorted out. And you know, I had 12 to 14 years of fantastic success. But a lot of people judge me on Lennox Lewis, but my whole career wasn't based on Lennox Lewis. I led Paul Ingalls to a world title. I led Scott Harrison to a world title. I got David Haye his first cruiserweight world title, which he won in America against Momac. I took Julius Francis, who was just an average fighter, who signed me when he came out of prison to win the Lonsdale belt outright. James Owabola, who couldn't win a title with anyone else, won the WBC International and the heavyweight title with me. You know, I had some great times with heavyweights, and I enjoyed it, and every weight. You know, I mean. If I look over it in general, I had more British and Commonwealth champions than most other promoters or managers at that time I was around.
No, I think everybody would say a fantastic promoter, manager. You know, did everything you could possibly achieve, and to get Lennox Lewis was just a wonder stroke, and then to handle Lennox the way you did and take him through a career as well as he did. And you know, you've got to say Lennox is the best British heavyweight of all time, so I think you've got a lot to be proud about.
Yeah, I enjoy, but you know, I've always said this, and I think this is the problem with promoters and managers today. They actually think they're bigger than the fighter. You're only as good as the fighters you handled, and I always remembered that. And if I was given the credit, I always made sure of point saying, you mustn't forget the fighter. It was them that they've made me. Without that fighter, none of you press guys would be talking to me. None of the TV companies would want to talk to me, because I know I've been down there, I've been up there, and now I'm back down there again. And it's strange because the boxing world has changed. I mean, I've had some very big disappointments in my boxing career. Some fighters I thought that should have won and lost, and one of the worst things that ever happened to me in boxing was the death of Darren Sutherland, which really, I think, rocked me, and I think made me start falling out of love with boxing. And also the tragic injury to Paul Ingalls, one of my favourite fighters, you know, and also the trouble Scott Harrison went through, because as much as I was able to help them in their boxing career, I wasn't able to help them in that side of things that went wrong. You know, I wasn't able to help Darren Sutherland with whatever he suffered with. The Paul Ingalls situation, that's completely a different shit. But Scott Harrison, again, you know, when they were with me, I felt we had things under control. But you can't live with your fighters 24/7. You have to trust them.
That's the thing with boxing. It's such a stark contrast, isn't it? And you've just mentioned it there. Some terrific highs, some wonderful nights, some glory, and then there's some misery and suffering and dark times. Tell me about some of the things, because Darren Sutherland it was a tragedy, and you were there. I think you discovered Darren, didn't you?
I discovered his body. I don't know why Darren done such a thing. He was such a bright young prospect. I actually thought he was going to be my next world champion. He was a national hero in Ireland. To this day, certain people blame me for his death, which is not true. I was dragged through an inquest, a coroner's court, and I had to engage legal assistance to protect myself and my reputation. I know what Darren said to me in private, things that he told me, and it's things that I will take to my grave with me, because I couldn't say them because it may have upset other people. But it was such a tragic, and it also made me realise the things that I was fighting in my own personal life, the stress and level that I was going through, that I had to stop hiding that. And then a very good friend of mine, Dean Powell, had that tragedy and threw himself under a train. And again, I just thought, if I don't come to terms with what I'm going through and what I'm hiding from the world, I could go that way. And it was when I did try to take my life, and I was found laying in the streets one Christmas Day, that I actually came to my senses and accepted and openly confessed what I was hiding from the world. And
that must have taken, being coming from the world that you come from and being the person that you were and around the fight game, that must have been something that was excruciatingly hard.
It was, because also there was my father, who was like my biggest supporter, who really had me on a pedestal, and he encouraged me when things went wrong. He would encourage me to stay on the right track, and how could I tell my father I wasn't really the son he thought I was? Again, I was bottling that up, and I didn't know how to deal with it. And boxing was an escape, because I'd wake up in the morning and I'd put on this suit as Frank Maloney, and I would go out and face the world. And sometimes I'd be nice, and sometimes I'd be a horrible bastard, excuse my language, and I would say things I shouldn't say, and I didn't care who I upset. But I was so protective of what was going on in my own head and my own inner thoughts. People saw this guy that never had a care in the world, that was drinking champagne, flying all around the world, partying, but they never saw the person that was not in the public eye, the person that would go to bed at night and cry herself to sleep, the person that didn't really want to socialise when the public wasn't seeing me, when the cameras wasn't on me, and the person that was destroying his own family, because I was carrying this secret that I couldn't tell the world. And when I was able to be myself and lift this burden off me, my life changed, and I think I'm in a much happier place. I'm even happier now than when Lennox Lewis won the world title. I know that might sound crazy, but my own life is contented now and fulfilled, and I am the person I should have always been, where previously I was living a lie and I was an actor on the stage, really, if I'm truthful.
How did you come to terms with, obviously, a deep depression? Who did you speak to, or what gave you the strength to come out, to bare your soul?
Well, no one knows, but I had counselling for 10 years. I first started counselling on the telephone because I didn't want no one to know who I was. Then I met another counsellor that totally destroyed me, actually. I depended on this counsellor. I even had this counsellor come to the gym that I run in Deptford and help me make business decisions. And I couldn't think without consulting this counsellor. And my partner, Tracy, saw what was happening to me, and she said to me, if you do not get rid of this counsellor, I will walk out of your life. She said, I know you need help, so she helped me find another counsellor called Jan, who I was with for 7 years. And when I went to see her, she said to me, I told her what was going on. I didn't tell her about my trans issue. I told her that I had very bad anger management and I couldn't deal with a lot of things. And I told her about the counsellors, and she said, let me give you a little bit of an explanation. She said, the easiest way of doing it is, she said, this is a windowsill. She said, for years the windowsill has been painted and it's been built coats of layers up to protect itself. She said, now what's happened is, because of the world you're in, you've built them layers up as you've gone along, so you've protected yourself. She said, but this counsellor has totally stripped you of all your layers, so you depend on people, and now you're not the person you was 2 or 3 years ago. She said, what I'm going to do, she said, is I'm going to put a varnisher coat over you so that you can go out and face the world and continue in the job you do and be the family person you should be. She said, I'm going to help give you back your confidence. And I quite like that, and it worked for me. But it took me 6 years to tell her about my trans issue. And when I finally told her, she went, I knew you was hiding something from me, but as your counsellor, I can't push you to tell me. You have to be able to tell me. And she helped me through the situation, and I think it came to a head. My life is always around boxing, that's what drives me mad. It came to a head with the David Price fights. David Price was my next heavyweight that I thought he won the British title, the Commonwealth title, and we were going towards the world title, and we made a fight with Tony Thompson, the old American, which on paper I thought was a safe fight. And obviously David got beat, and when I saw the fight I realised that styles did not suit, and I knew that I'd made a mistake, but I knew I could get past that mistake by going another route. So I sat with David, and I sat with his lawyer, and I was at this time privately transitioning. I was actually living part-time as Kellie and part-time as Frank Maloney. When I was in front of the cameras and working, I was Frank Maloney. When I was away, I'd moved to a seaside town on the south coast where no one, not even my family, knew where I was living. And down there I was living as Kellie. And I sat with David after the fight, and I said, this is the route I want to go, David. And he went, no, I want a rematch. I went, David, you do not need a rematch. He went, I want the rematch. He said, that was a mistake, that I just slipped up on that night. I went, David, you got beat. Do not believe everything that you read in the press. We plant stories in the press. So I said, but if we go down this route, after 3 fights, people will forget about the Thompson fight. And in that time, Thompson may have had 2 more fights, be beaten up, and then you'll be ready for him. I want it now. And his lawyers insisted. They went, under our contract with you, if we want that fight, you've got to deliver it. And I looked there and I went, I don't want this fight. I said, the reasons why, the same result could happen. Rematches are never as good as the first fight. We could lose quite a bit of money on it, or I could lose money on it because you're all guaranteed money, but I'm not. I said, and I think it's a bad match. And I said, the public, you can go another route, but they adamantly insist on it. And I was with my lawyer, Neil Sibley, who I'm sure you know, a very good boxing lawyer. And I looked at Neil and I said, what do you think, Neil? And Neil went, you've got to do what you think's right. I went, I think we shouldn't do the rematch. I said, I don't want to do the rematch. And they went, if you don't do the rematch, we will take action against you. So, and I went, do you know what? I'll do the effing rematch. And as we got up and walked out the room, I turned to Neil and my daughter Emma, who was working for me, and I went, I have never given in to a fighter and a lawyer when I know I'm right. I said, I'm no longer cut out for this game. But they didn't know that I was also transitioning and I was on hormones. So there was a softer side of me coming through. And we know what happened in the second fight. He got beat again. I broke down on TV. People actually thought that I was having a mental breakdown. I actually wasn't. I was very emotional because of what the hormones and how I was going through my body. And after that I realised that I could no longer, at that level of boxing, I wasn't strong enough to compete anymore. So I walked away from the sport to continue my transition and to get to where I am today.
And the transition now, is that where are we there? Well, is that, are you through?
Now, if you see,
yeah,
I'm the person I've always believed I should be. I'm a very competitive person. I've just taken over this pub, the Unicorn, and I'm enjoying my life. I've gone back into boxing, but I've only gone back with 2 young fighters, and it's like starting, as I said, at the very bottom again. It's like being the manager of Manchester United and then waking up the next day being told you're going to manage an non-league side. But I'm enjoying looking after the two young fighters. I do, if I'm honest, I do find the boxing world do not give me the same respect they gave Frank Maloney. I actually find some of the officials don't even talk to me, where before they was all over me. I've seen some of the remarks that have been made about my transitioning and what's happened to me by certain people in boxing. I've read certain stuff on the internet, but all of that now just flows over my head because I'm not at war with the world, where Frank Maloney was at war with the world and himself. Kellie's not. Kellie's a contented person. She's happy. She's found peace, and I'm enjoying life. And you know, if my two young fighters achieve something, that will be even a greater success than I've done with Lennox Lewis, because as much as I transitioned and my body has changed, my mind hasn't changed. It's still got a boxing brain. I can still tell a good fighter if I see one. But because boxing has changed so much, and the TV companies are not like they used to be, the people running them are not the people, have not got the loyalty or the dedication that I've always worked with. I'd always worked with people where if I'd done a deal and shook a hands, that deal was done. Nowadays, unless you get it, cross the I's, dot the T's, and stamp them with the Pope's signature, no deal is safe in boxing. And that goes from TV executives all the way down. And I find the promoters today, they're not boxing promoters. The big ones aren't. They're TV producers. All they're doing is producing stuff for TV. It's like a conveyor belt. If a fighter loses, okay, move him off and let's move someone on the conveyor belt. It's not about building fighters. And I come from a world where you build fighters, where you establish a fighter, not the quick conveyor belt system. It just doesn't, it doesn't work in the sport. And today I see they announce Floyd Mayweather and McGregor. That is an absolute insult to boxing. How anyone can even think about watching that fight or buying it, it's a disgrace. McGregor should not be allowed in the ring. I could go in the gym and pick an amateur kid out who's had about 10 or 12 fights, and I guarantee he could beat McGregor. But how can he fight the world's #1 fighter for one of the biggest paydays ever? It shows you where boxing's becoming a circus. And Floyd Mayweather should be ashamed of himself for even entertaining that fight, because he is bringing down the level of boxing. He's bringing it down and disrespecting all those young fighters that work and dream about fighting for a world title and fighting someone like Mayweather. Would be better off giving a young fighter the opportunity to, but it wouldn't fill his bank account, and that is the problem today. Boxing has always been about money, but this is beyond money. I couldn't even bring myself to watch that fight, if I'm honest.
Kellie, the one thing I've got to say is the last time I saw you, you were sitting in my dining table. We were having dinner up at my house, and I honestly, if I'm honest, I didn't know what to expect. But the one thing that I can see is the passion is still there, the knowledge is still there. So I think, Kellie, you need to be back in boxing. I think boxing needs you. And thank you very much for having us down here from Boxing Social, from Kellie Maloney. Just like to say thank you very much. And it's been great talking to you.
Lovely to see you, Claire.
Great to see you.